"48 hereditary chiefs of the Gitxsan-Wet'suwet'en Tribal Council have taken the federal government to court in a battle over land claims and land management. At stake are over 22,000 square miles of land owned by the Indian people. But ownership to our Native brothers and sisters is a very different concept than our own. Native land ownership seems much more what God had in mind when she asked people to be good stewards of the earth. Tonight, Neil Sterritt and Alvin Dixon talk about land claims and ownership and their efforts to achieve a just and fair settlement from the government on the Pressure Point.
Good evening. Welcome again to Pressure Point. My name is George Searcy and I'm your host for this evening. And tonight the second part of our program on Indian land claims. And let me introduce you again to those who are leading us in the discussion, Alvin Dixon and Neil Sterritt. We have also in our audience several guests who are here to share in the question period. Cliff, Cynthia, Rod, and Dean, and they'll be sharing in the program as well. Alvin Dixon is Native Ministries Coordinator for the United Church of Canada in the province of British Columbia. Neil Sterritt is President of the Gitxsan-Wet'suwet'en Tribal Council from Hazelton. Gentlemen, we'll turn the beginning of the program over to you, and Alvin, if you'll take charge from this point.
Comprehensive land claim. What does that mean?
Well, comprehensive claim means it's more what was referred to earlier by our grandfathers as the land question, or the definition of the relationship between Aboriginal people and the Queen, the Crown, Canada, or the provinces. And basically it's the overall issue of Aboriginal title and rights. A comprehensive claim includes a settlement, negotiated settlement, litigated settlement, whatever you want to call it, that deals with the ownership and the issues surrounding ownership of the land that belongs to in our case, the Gitxsan-Wet'suwet'en and the province and the federal government.
The other term that has been used is specific claim. What is that?
Well, a specific claim is a situation that may have arisen since Europeans or since the governments have set up reserves or have entered into a situation where there's been a wrong done to an Indian group. An example is in the 1880s and 1890s, reserves were set up by the federal government. In 1912 to 1915 in British Columbia, there was a commission went around and reviewed the size of those reserves and the location of those reserves. At that time, many reserves were that were near good industrial sites or on railroad land were taken away from Indian people, and there was no negotiations. They were simply removed from their land. And today there are Indian groups who are challenging that action by the provincial and federal government. And in that situation, when you're dealing with a specific situation on a specific piece of land that has been removed, one way or the other, then you have what is called a specific claim. The distinction is between a specific claim and a comprehensive claim. Comprehensive claim deals with all aspects of Aboriginal title and rights. Specific claim would be a litigated case on a specific situation.
Would the Kitwanga CN dispute represent a specific claim?
Yes, that's actually the only specific claim in our territory. What happened was in I couldn't give you the exact date, but about 1915, when the railroad came through, part of their land was taken away from them, and some graves were dug up. There was no concern for the graveyard of our people. The railroad went right through that spot, and there's a specific claim on that. The Kitwanga Band has been trying to deal with that for 10 years now and have been getting very little action.
I understand there was some resolution to the problem just recently. Has there been?
Well, not to the specific claim as such. There has been several issues going on there. One of them is that the reserve is quite large. A so-called industrial park was leased by the CNR from the federal government recently, or pardon me, not recently, but in past years, I think about 60 years ago. And the CNR subleased that to some logging companies who set up sawmills on the reserve. And the issue is who owns that land and who should be getting revenue. And that is coming to resolution now because the Kitwangaw Band took some direct action.
Mm-hmm. In relation to other people, Indian people in the province, has there been any consultation in your taking the court action?
One of the things that we did when we decided that we were going to court, and when we framed what it is we were going to court on, was make a deliberate effort to go around to the tribal groups who had a lot of experience and understood these issues, and talk to them about it. And on top of that, I have attended large meetings of tribal groups in Vancouver, assemblies of all of the tribal groups, and when we had our statement of claim drawn up, before we filed it, I presented that to all the tribal groups in a meeting in Vancouver and let them know exactly what we were doing.
I have heard it said that settling land claims is not a priority with some of our Indian bands and some of our Indian leaders. Is that true?
I think that's true. I think you can generalize and say that all Aboriginal people in BC would like to see a settlement of the issue, but not all of them are making it a priority. Some of them are that as you know, we have housing problems, we have economic problems, educational problems, and those issues have to be dealt with. And so if, say, you're at a band level or a tribal level that has those kind of difficulties, it's, you know, a lot of them deal with those issues and don't necessarily deal with the larger issue of land claims or Aboriginal title.
In pursuing those other critical problems, we get into a discussion about self-determination and self-government. Wouldn't it be preferable to make land claims a priority to quickly achieve some of the social issues that need to be corrected?
Well, our opinion is that we've looked at projects that have been designed to solve the economic problems of our people. And many of those projects, as you know, in past years, in the past 20 years, let's say a large sawmill built near a reserve or near a tribal group, you know, it's the money that is needed to build that project is justified on the backs of the unemployed Indians. And what we've observed in those cases is that when the mills have been built, after 5 years or 10 years, our unemployment problem is the same or even higher. But the money is justified on the unemployed Indian people in the area. So we feel that there are other very fundamental changes that have to take place to solve our economic problems and our social problems. And so the Gitxsan Wet'suwet'en have made a very high priority working on land claims and trying to make those changes. And where we're at right now is not only dealing with the land claims issue, but now we're in a position, because we're negotiating at that level, we're in a position to start working as well on some of the social and economic problems to try and bring them into focus as we proceed in a major way on the land claims front.
Why is the provincial government in BC unwilling to negotiate land claims?
Well, it's a historical position. It goes all the way back to the 1850s when Governor Douglas began to negotiate treaties. He was negotiating those treaties on behalf of the Hudson Bay. And he was unable to finish that process because the Hudson Bay simply didn't provide the kind of money he needed to do it. But as a result, there were about 13 treaties on Vancouver Island. When Governor Trutch took over from Douglas and the province entered Confederation in 1871, Trutch's policy was to not recognize title, to not negotiate treaties, and his attitude about Indians was very colonial, I think you could say almost racist, and he didn't view Indians as being of much value or much consequence to the province. So the province entered with that attitude. BC became a province with that kind of an attitude. That attitude, that policy has been carried through to this very day by all governments of this province. And the Bennett government in particular has reflected those attitudes as well in a very strong way. They just simply refuse to recognize or acknowledge that Aboriginal people have title and that it's an unfinished business to be dealt with.
The federal government didn't always weren't always willing to negotiate land claims. Could you comment?
That's right. The federal government has implemented many policies in the past 100 years, particularly education policies, to prevent Indian people from continuing to learn their languages, learn their culture, or live the way they have in the past. They have, even in recent years, during the Trudeau years, did not acknowledge that Aboriginal people had title or rights. They knew that we had an issue that we were wanting to address, but they refused to acknowledge it. It made it very difficult for us to try and negotiate or go into court. In the 1970s, 1969, the Calder case was launched and went all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. And at that point, the provincial government for the first time acknowledged that perhaps Aboriginal people had some sort of title in Canada. They acknowledged there was an issue, there was unfinished business at the federal level.
White people have a concept of land ownership totally different than you and I. Could you explain?
Well, the Europeans who live in Canada now believe in private property. They buy their house and the lot that it's on. They buy a farm. They have ownership of that. It's a concept that they brought with them. It is something that is very important to them. But Aboriginal people have their attitude about land is, for example, is a hereditary chief within the Gitxsan and Wet'suwet'en owns a territory. The territory could be anywhere from 500 to 2,000 square miles in size. That territory, the name of the hereditary chief could be Delgamuukw, for example. That's the first plaintiff on our claim. And Delgamuukw owns that land on behalf of all of the people within his house. And it's the name Delgamuukw that has possession of that land. He is simply the caretaker. He looks after that land. He has to protect it and make sure that all of the house in the present and in the future benefit from that land. That's the concept of ownership for us.
George?
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for introducing the evening for us. We're going to break now and have a few questions from our guests in the studio, and also from myself, to raise some issues that you've already addressed, perhaps, or some new ones. You raised and mentioned, Neil, the right to fish, where the fish come into your land, into your right by your front door, as you said. Then if you're going to do that, that's going to affect the fisheries all the way along the coast. And that's going to make a difference to those fishermen out there.
That's right. But let me give you an example. The Gitxsan and Wet'suwet'en have spent, since 1977, in intense debate and, well, many, many terms, with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans with respect to the fishery. We have developed a set of bylaws that we're going to put in place. The bylaw will allow the commercialization of the inland fishery. In 1985, at this time last year, we understood that we would if we submitted our bylaws at this time, we'd spent 3 years trying to negotiate an acceptable set of bylaws. If we submitted them at that time, they would be passed. We submitted them, and then we were called to Ottawa to meet. And what we wanted to do was do a test fishery last summer. We wanted to take about 10,000 fish to see how we could, how the commercialization of the inland fishery would take place, and what are the working problems. I was in Ottawa arguing with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans about this issue. And at that time, we already knew that there were 250,000 surplus fish. And the fact of the matter is, we would have been happy with 1,000 fish, not necessarily 10,000. We were prepared to do that. Department of Fisheries and Oceans refused to accommodate our needs. By the end of the summer, there were 2 million salmon that were unable to spawn at the headwaters in the spawning channels in Babine Lake. They had already had the escapement they needed to allow for the fish to replenish themselves, and they shut the gates, and there were 2 million fish there. Those 2 million fish swam right by every one of our villages. We could not take 1,000 fish, according to them, under our bylaws. So there are many ways that the Gitxsan and Wet'suwet'en can help the fishery and can help themselves, and there may be an accommodation needed at the coast, but it's not a major accommodation. It is now known that the existing fishery cannot continue the way it is. I think that's an acceptable scientific fact, and if we're really concerned about the fish, it even becomes a biological and an economic fact that you cannot take the fish the way we have for the past 100 years. There has to be an adjustment. You can't take, say, a major enhanced run like the Babine River and have a stream that is weak, the run from a weak stream going up with those fish at the coast, and take, say, the large run indiscriminately and therefore also wipe out the small run. The only place you can distinguish between runs is when they get to their streams. Or if you take the fish in such a way that the fish are still alive when you're through. Rather than in nets, you take them in, what we propose to do in the future is take fish in basket traps. We're going to use the technology that our people had at the turn of the century. But I've stated it before and I'll state it again, there will always be a commercial fishery on the coast, but it's going to have to adjust. And that's what, I think everybody knows that. How do they do that? But it shouldn't detract from the commercial inland fishery.
As we move towards the end of the program, any quick questions from the floor? Rod.
Neil, you've heard, well, I've heard some talk that, well, everyone is expecting a provincial election coming up, and one of the issues that is thrown about is that the Socret government will play up the issue that land claims is sort of an alarming thing for the citizens of this province. Do you think there's any real concern there? Should the citizens really have any particular alarm over native claims in BC?
No, I don't think so, because I think the claims will help the province when we're through. The kind of information that the province, the leaders, I'm talking about the Attorney General, Brian Smith, the Premier, the Intergovernmental Affairs Minister, Gardy Gardam, they are saying that it's going to cost billions and that the people of the province can't afford it. And they're also saying that we're going to take away their land, take away the non-Indian people's land. Both of those are untrue. Number one, in our statement of claim, we are not threatening individual people's land. And we are saying that if it's a choice between dollars, just to simplify the issue, it's not, I'm not going into a lot of detail on it, but if it's a choice between dollars and the management of the 22,000 square miles of our territory, obviously it's the management of that territory. It's not going to be a settlement of dollars. There are damages that have been done. That's another issue that we'll address. But in terms of the quantities and the size of the dollars that the province is talking about, no way.
When you speak about management, are you talking about exclusive management in your area, or are you talking about co-management?
Well, I don't like to use the word co-management, and I'm definitely not talking about exclusive management. If we're talking about the fishery alone, what we have committed ourselves to in writing, when our bylaws are in place, we will enter into negotiations and discussions with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and all other users upstream and downstream to talk about how our management scheme will be integrated with the larger management scheme. I don't know whether I want to call that co-management. I'm not sure what I want to call it. In terms of the management of the territory, we see the Gitxsan and Wet'suwet'en playing a major role in managing that territory, and the non-Indian people as well, because the people of that territory should be responsible for the decisions that are made about the management of that territory. There's a certain collective wisdom of all people, but the farther you get from the problem, the less wisdom you have about the problem or the solution. We think that'll be to the benefit of the province of British Columbia, to all people in BC. If we can get our people from 90% unemployment to 10% or less unemployment, it has to be to the advantage of BC and Canada, for all parts of Canada to be in that situation. You can only do that if you have some say over and some opportunity to better yourself. The unemployment rate for non-Indian in our territory is now moving to 20 and 30%. They have to be able to solve their problems. But the present logging practices, the present exploitation does not allow for that. We all have to be able to make our choices in the future.
Alvin, as we move towards the conclusion of the program, are there areas we haven't covered that you are concerned that we cover?
The Native Brotherhood of BC is an Indian organization largely made up of commercial Indian people. I would just like to ask Cliff, the executive director, Cliff Atleo, the executive director of the Native Brotherhood of BC, to respond to Neil's comments about an inland commercial fishery.
Cliff?
Yes, Neil, I'm quite aware of the concerns that have been voiced by commercial user groups, primarily by the non-Indian commercial user groups, on the proposed idea of establishing an inland commercial fishery. And I think it's rather interesting that we have a situation now with a proposal like the Gitxsan-Wet'suwet'en proposal for inland fisheries of non-Indian commercial fishermen saying that, look, there's no way you can set that up at our expense, they say. And my response to that is that when is it going to be at their expense sometime, you know? For a long time now it's been at the Indian people's expense. Everything that's ever been set up and established, rules, regulations, laws, has always been against Indian people. And I'm sure that perhaps some of our members are going to have some misunderstandings about the proposal. But basically we're an organization that stands very firmly behind the concept of bettering Indian people. And for the life of me, I can't understand any people that would oppose the betterment of Indian people. And if that's going to do that for your people, I think that you would find overall our organization being supportive of that, because that's what we've worked for 55 years. Granted, we're an organization supported by commercial interests. We're supported by dues that they pay annually. But you're right. There is a lot of mismanagement that occurs on the outside, and you cited a perfect example of that. And despite 1985 having been a good year, the department made public releases saying what a great year it was for commercial fishermen. They messed up a lot. They messed up with that skein of Babine over-escapement. They messed up in the Atnarco system and a Bellacoola system. And they messed up some of the fall chum fisheries. And I think that, certainly I believe that there's room for that kind of an operation, because what else do we have? You know, you've said it already in the program that the fishery is a very important thing to our people, economically, socially, culturally. And I think that that certainly we would like to see progress, and certainly I know that there'll be further discussions within our organization, but I'm pretty sure that it'll come up with full support for the idea.
Thank you, Cliff. Other questions from the floor? Cynthia, you're there?
Just a quick one. Neil, you mentioned that there are now 9,000 members in your council after Bill C-31. This has to do with the reclaiming of status of the women who've lost their status. Is that Bill C-31?
That's right.
And
What we were, we knew that there was around 7,000 or 8,000 members. But since the Bill C-31 and people trying to sort out, whether or not they could obtain Indian status through the Indian Act and Bill C-31, we've discovered that there's probably more than that. There's probably closer to 9,000. I mean, they were always Gitxsan or Wet'suwet'en. It's just that now they are coming out of the woodwork.
So you've already established qualifications for their membership in your
Well,
group.
no, that's different. Bill C-31 is something else. We have another way of dealing with the membership of the Gitxsan and Wet'suwet'en.
Alvin?
I have two further questions. Obviously, the implementation of banned bylaws relating to fisheries is a move towards assuming greater responsibility for resource management generally. Now, the Gitxsan-Wet'suwet'en, band by band, are implementing bylaws?
That's right. The Tribal Council and the bands worked on developing the bylaws. It was important to do it because the fish are throughout all parts of the territory, and it has to be integrated within our own system. The Tribal Council has spearheaded it, but it will be banned by banned bylaws. That's right.
Okay. Now, in terms of an overall land claim settlement, is that a process that will accelerate as you move towards other resource use?
Very definitely. For example, in the logging industry, we have great concerns about some of the new logging that's going on and the existing logging. And we have advised by letter all of the logging companies within our territory that we don't wish to stop, the little economy that there is within our territory. We won't stop the existing logging, but we don't want to see any future logging that will do damage. And we have had responses from the logging companies, and we're sitting down and dealing with them on that. We're telling them we want to see some of the present practices change, present logging, and in some given areas, no logging whatsoever. And in those areas where we may go into in the future, they may have to adjust their logging plan according to our objectives. And what we're finding is the logging companies are agreeing with us. There are situations where a logging company has wanted to go and log a certain way and knew that it was foolish to do it another way. They were aware there were fish in streams. The BC Forest Service has insisted that they log right to the edge of salmon-producing streams. And we've intervened in the past. So we're finding that logging companies agree and support the kinds of standards that we're setting. And as far as we're concerned, that is the jurisdiction of the hereditary chiefs to do that. And the loggers are responding to it. So we're doing it in fish, we're doing it in the logging area, we're doing it in trapping, and in many areas.
The commercial inland fishery that you talk about, do you perceive that as additional to the existing Indian food fishery?
We don't talk about an Indian food fishery. We only refer to the Indian fishery. Historically, it was an Indian fishery. We took those fish for food, and we traded them. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans and the Department of Indian Affairs talk about food fishery, but we don't.
If I can shift the focus just a bit. Alvin, when you go back to Toronto and you meet with national council people in terms of the life of the church on the national level, do you find the Indian people from Manitoba, from Saskatchewan, from Quebec involved in the same kind of concerns as we've been involved here tonight?
Not as intensely in terms of land claims. They already have treaties across the country. And Neil travels in the political arena across the country. And our discussions among different people usually center on BC specific, isolated, different situation. Like we have no treaties in BC. Usually they talk about broken treaties, and unfulfilled treaty obligations by federal governments. Maybe Neil can add a little comment to that.
Well, I think that's quite accurate. Generally speaking, the only place in Canada where there are no treaties is in British Columbia. In other parts of Canada, where they're in discussions, it is, as you say, specific claims. And a lot of them are dealing with, because they have a treaty, which, as you know, a treaty is an agreement between nations. Because they have that, then they can deal with other issues. They don't have to go to that unless the treaty has not been honored. But there's no other part of Canada as intense as British Columbia in terms of the Aboriginal rights issue.
How do you see the future in terms of the Indian land claims? Do you see the Indian people themselves perhaps becoming more and more urgent in their claims, or with the division in the bands in terms of opinion perhaps backing away a bit? How does the future look in the whole matter?
BC coastal Indians probably will be more urgent, because we're basically a salmon people, a sea resource based, versus mineral and other resource users. So our situation is far more urgent, I think, on the coast.
Alvin, Neil, thank you for being with us tonight. Folks in the studio, thank you for your questions and for your involvement in the program. Good night, and God bless you.